From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Massacre in Oregon.
Somebody somewhere will comment and say, Obama politicized this issue. Well, this is something we should politicize. It is relevant to our common life together, to the body politic.
Western Oregon's Umpqua Community College serves over 3,000 full-time students. The college aims to enable Oregonians to pursue more fulfilling lives. But on Thursday morning, the college's faculty and students suffered a vicious attack from a 26-year-old gunman, Chris Harper Mercer. Mr. Mercer entered the college and murdered at least 9 people, wounding 9 more. Mercer was then killed. According to some reports, Mercer was motivated by a desire for infamy. Regardless, the shooting has reopened the contentious gun control and mental health debate. While gun rights activists argue that public safety would be well served by allowing trained students or faculty to carry firearms on campus, gun control activists say tougher laws are needed to prevent deranged individuals from accessing guns. The gunman had 6 weapons on him, 6, and 7 others at home. He's quoted as having said, "I've been waiting to do this for years." Unquote. Chris Harper Mercer. Do we need new gun laws, Pat?
No, one of the things that motivates people like that, John, is just what you're doing. You've put his name out on the air several times. You got his picture of him. This is a loser. This is a nobody. This is a guy that lives his life, and he suddenly decides, I want to go out in a blaze of glory, a blaze of infamy. I want to go out like the guys at Columbine and like the guys at the guy at Newtown, like that character in South Carolina that shot up that black church. And how does he do it? He says, if I get some guns and go in and kill a lot of kids, my name will be as well known as that of John Dillinger. And he's gotten coverage all day, wall to wall. I understand why you get it, but we make a mistake if we don't think this is a magnet for the next guy sitting out there who's a nobody and says, I'd like to go out like that.
Helena.
America doesn't have a monopoly on nobodies. There are nobodies in every country in the world and in industrialized countries, and America is the only country that has mass killings on a regular basis. We can learn from other countries. In Australia in the 90s, after they had a mass killing, they tightened down on their gun laws, and they haven't suffered anything like that in 20 years since. Gun laws need to be tighter in this country. It is too easy for people to buy numbers of guns, straw purchasers, passing them along where they're used for crimes. And to say that we can't do anything, that the NRA is too strong, Congress can't act, is to give Congress a pass on an issue that is critical to this country. And we're living in the midst of a political revolution on the right and the left of disgust with our lawmakers. And this is one more issue to add to the list. There's going to be a tipping point on this issue. At some point, the American people will have had enough.
NRA is the National Rifle Association. And my question is the NRA a public ally or a public enemy?
Well, like any political lobbying group in the United States, they are a public ally to some and a public enemy to others. I would say one of the things that we have to address with gun crime in America is that the mass shootings really are not the core issue. The core issue is people being shot every day on the street. If you look at Chicago, though, is a great microcosm of that. I'm sure Clarence will comment on this.
Very well familiar with it, yes.
Chicago McDonald case, where a gentleman, Otis McDonald, who's 81 now, petitioned to be able to have a handgun in his house.
Are these Clarence's lines?
No, Clarence will come in on it.
Clarence has plenty of lines, John. Thank you.
But Mr. McDonald's, I went and looked on the Chicago, government website today, the city website, and in Mr. McDonald's neighborhood, in the last month, there have been 3 homicides, small neighborhood, 3 homicides, 15 burglaries, 10 robberies. So as much as we can do things like challenging straw purchases, perhaps making that a federal issue, bringing up RICO statutes to hit gangs when they do these transactions, send someone off. At the same time, I would say we need to have that position where law-abiding homeowners are able to retain weapons in the home with relative ease, because there's not only a physical element of safety, there's a psychological element of safety they find from that.
Well, I agree we need to find a way to live with guns because there's just too many of them to get rid of all of them. We shouldn't get hung up on the idea of banning, but why do we talk about Chicago and not New York? Because New York is not surrounded by states where there are no gun controls like Chicago is. And we're right next to Indiana, and we got Wisconsin, all these other surrounding states, and even the counties there in Illinois. You just go outside of Chicago and buy a gun. So banning gun sales in Chicago doesn't do any good in that regard. Whereas in New York, it's very difficult to buy a gun. You can buy them, but you've got to be registered, interviewed, et cetera, et cetera. So they've got a procedure to try to eliminate people who would be eliminated by the kind of background checks that we ought to have nationally, and that the NRA supported back in the 90s, background checks universally, including Wayne LaPierre and the others. But now they see politically they can get away without supporting background checks.
Yeah, but there's a lot we can,
we've heard about guns.
There's a lot we can agree on, and the approach that the gun safety lobby is taking now is keep guns out of hands of the wrong people. That's the dangerously mentally ill, felons.
Everybody agrees with that.
Exactly, felons.
And mentally ill, if people have
yes,
been
so,
verifiably
yes,
ill, cannot buy guns. John,
yes, but
something.
they can buy guns.
They can
buy guns. They buy them over the internet. It's a huge marketplace. There are no background checks there.
But Indiana,
and gun shows
Indiana,
there
they're not shooting each other up, even if they buy them there.
Oh,
They're shooting each other up
homicides in Indiana.
It's the culture.
They're sending the guns here.
If there's a culture of disrespect and disregard for life that is far deeper in Chicago than it is in Indiana.
But that doesn't excuse guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have them.
Well,
and we ought to get together about that and not argue
the
about
mentally ill and felons should not have guns.
That's right, but you can't get background checks through
I
Congress.
get background checks in Virginia.
You can't get them through Congress.
You can't get them through Congress.
All right.
Well, 5% of gun dealers supply 95% of the guns that are used in crimes. The ATF, which is a toothless agency, needs to take the licenses away from these people.
But also, 9 out of 10 cities in America, the top 10 cities with the highest murder rates in America are Democratic controlled.
It doesn't matter.
No, but so there are broader social,
matter.
but there's compromise needed on both sides. I don't mean to make that a partisan thing.
No, it's not a partisan thing.
But we do need.
The fact is, look at cities like New York. Once again, they're not surrounded by places.
But 20%.
New York does not have a high murder rate per capita. DC's far higher.
Because the gun ownership per capita is much lower.
The guns come into D.C. from Virginia.
Relinquish.
Why is Virginia
you brought this up.
responsible for
Virginia
D.C.
has lax laws, and you're right over the
If this
bridge.
continues,
I'm responsible for D.C.
If this continues,
got out
I'm
of
going
there.
out and get my own revolver.
Look out.
The president is such a good guy, and this has gone right to the heart of him, because he cannot get control of guns. And this week he was on the air repeatedly, and his message was, as I said a few months ago, and I said a few months before that, and I said each time we see one of these mass shootings, our thoughts and prayers are not enough. It's not enough. It does not capture the heartache and grief and anger that we should feel. And it does nothing to prevent this carnage from being inflicted someplace else in America. Next week or a couple of months from now. When Americans are killed in mine disasters, we work to make mines safer.
John,
when Americans are killed in floods and hurricanes, we make communities
John,
safer.
That is the point. This guy, this 26-year-old guy you're talking about, got the President of the United States to come out to the podium of the White House and to speak and grimace and argue. He's got you talking about it. The whole country's talking about it. And some nut is sitting out there watching all this stuff and says, I want to end it all, and that's the way to go.
So your answer is there should be a media blackout?
Well, that's what the guy, the police
the sad
chief
thing
in
is-
Oregon
Well,
is media blacking out the guy's name.
I don't want to make celebrities out of these people, but you can't ignore the
I
fact
didn't
that
say
this
you
is
ignore
going
that.
on.
You ought to treat the guy as what he
we
is.
shouldn't act
Well,
surprised.
the sad thing is we've had about a dozen massacres since Obama's election alone. I mean, it's just
Starting with Phoenix,
terrible. Yeah, it's a terrible situation. And there's no legislative reaction at all.
Issue 2, Assembly of Nations.
The United States is prepared to work with any nation, including Russia and Iran, to resolve the conflict. But we must recognize that there cannot be, after so much bloodshed, so much carnage, a return to the pre-war status quo.
We think it is an enormous mistake to refuse to cooperate with the Syrian government and its armed forces who are violently fighting terrorism face to face.
Attending the annual United Nations General Assembly in New York, President Obama and President Putin of Russia called for greater cooperation against terrorists and for a peace deal to end Syria's 4-year civil war. But the two men continue to strongly disagree on one issue: Syria's leader, Bashar al-Assad. President Obama wants Assad gone. President Putin wants Assad to stay. And on Wednesday, Russia began its own airstrikes against rebel groups fighting Assad's regime. Russia requested that the U.S.-led coalition that is bombing the Islamic State terrorist group suspend its air operations. But the U.S. refused. When it comes to Assad, who is right, Obama or Putin?
Well, President Obama, as I see it, doesn't have a strategy. Once again, the Russians have outmaneuvered him. What the Russians are now doing is projecting power up north in the center to retain Assad's control. I had a piece out yesterday arguing that I think what the Russians will do is essentially try and seize that area, smash the US-supported moderate rebels, and cede the east of the country to ISIS, al-Nusra, a bit up in the north, and the Kurds up the north. And that will metastasize the problem. Iran and ISIS, it will continue to conflagrate. This is a really significant disaster.
Yeah, Obama made a significant concession in saying that Assad could be a transitional figure in any kind of interim regime. And I think the Russians are right in seeing ISIS as the greater threat, but they don't distinguish between ISIS and all the other people who are protesting. And I think Obama's strategy is stay out of a quagmire, and Russia may just have jumped into one.
What Russia's doing is they stand by their friends. Unlike us, we pull the rug out from under Hosni Mubarak. They're standing, Tom is right, they're standing by Assad. The Iranians are standing by him. They're going to fight in there. What they want to do is come to the table and preserve a segment of Syria. And frankly, everybody knows Assad's going to be gone, but they're coming to the table with tickets. And Obama, he's fighting ISIS here, which aids Saddam, or Assad, and then here he's aiding the rebels to overthrow Assad. The Americans don't know what they're doing. Right. The Russians do.
Yeah, I think that actually the Russians are doing us a service by fighting ISIS for us. We ought to just stand back and let them do it. I mean, we don't know what to do with Syria, and Putin's purpose is very clear. He's willing to make the sacrifices. One thing I would disagree, though, is I don't think he wants to make a safe zone for ISIS. I think Putin is just as anti-ISIS and these other terrorist groups, because they have attacked Moscow and Chechnya, etc., too.
Yeah. So I think he doesn't care about them, but he does want to. And the problem with him attacking the moderate rebels, right, is that it forces Sunnis onto the other side. It says the only liberation force is ISIS, which isn't true. No. I would say, though, with Pat, the compromise, and this is why I worry that Putin is more interested in a bigger project, but the compromise, you're right, is to say to Putin, you can keep Tartus, you can keep Latakia, your bases.
Look, Russians
Excuse me, Elena, just keep quiet.
I just want to say one thing. Russians are fighting in Syria, and they're going back to Russia, and Putin's got a problem. He doesn't want Syria exported to Russia. So
I want to remind you to let me in if I want to get in. You got it, John? You like the program, don't you?
Show.
Okay. You like being here, don't you?
I like it very much.
All right, let's go. How dangerous is this situation? The answer is there is a great risk of an accidental U.S.-Russian military encounter. Both sides have aerial operations that could lead to encounters, as well as on-the-ground anti-ISIS military operations. The U.S. has Army units, Special Forces, and U.S. Marine regiments on the ground in the fight against ISIS. If the Russians hit U.S. troops or vice versa, it will be a crisis.
We don't have troops on the ground in Syria, I hope. You're talking about Iraq, but there's no doubt there's a need for what they call deconfliction. The Americans and the Russians are both talking, the Israelis are talking, to make sure their aircraft do not involve with one another.
That's one good thing, because the two militaries are talking to each other.
Okay, the ideology of battle. This was said at the UN on Monday. Quote, an aggressive foreign interference has resulted in a brazen destruction of national institutions and the lifestyle itself. Instead of the triumph of democracy and progress, we got violence, poverty, and social disaster. Nobody cares a bit about human rights, including the right to life. I cannot help asking those who have caused the situation, do you realize now what you've done? End quote. Whose words are these?
Those are Vladimir Putin, John, and what he is saying is that the American post-Cold War ideology of liberal interventionism for liberal democracy has created disasters in Afghanistan and Libya and Iraq, and the man has a point.
It's Putin blaming the West for all the problems in the world, and I don't think it's liberal democracy, and I don't think we actually even tried to export that. We would have liked to, but I think we found out that that doesn't work.
Yeah, Putin loves to prance around and present himself as holier than thou on the world stage, despite all the massacres he's been responsible for. But this is a case of him reaching out to his own people, who among whom his approvals are remarkably high, because he plays to this image of being the little czar.
So that's Putin's point, correct?
Yep.
Is that Putin's point?
Putin's point is that we are responsible for the disaster in the Middle East by our interventions, and again, many Americans think the same thing.
Well, I think Iraq was a grave error.
Was Libya a good idea?
Yes, but well, we should have paid more attention after Libya went
Was
down.
Afghanistan, how does that look?
But I'm not.
He left Afghanistan to us,
I'm
didn't he?
not defending all the czars that were in place either. And a lot of those czars are toppled
Okay.
because of their revolt from their own people. That's what happened in Libya.
Okay, more on the ideological battle. And who said this? Quote, "The strong men of today become the spark of revolution tomorrow. You can jail your opponents, but you cannot imprison ideas. You can control access to information, but you cannot turn a lie into truth." End quote. And whose word
That
was
was President
That was President
Obama.
Obama, and you see there the tension between the worldviews. But the problem is, I would see it, President Putin has put his into action in terms of physical manifestations of force. I get, look, President Obama, most Americans don't want to be there, but I think our current foreign policy track makes longer-term conflict more likely.
Well, the president believes that in the end, that ideas will win, and that ISIS does not have a sustainable ideology.
You agree with that?
I think Putin is trying to recover from the humiliation of the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Soviet Union, and that's what appeals to his people about the way he's behaving right now. But I don't think he wants to start another world war.
But to beat ISIS, you need troops on the ground, and nobody's willing to provide them.
That's right.
And Putin isn't either.
No,
That's right.
Let's try Trump's tax scheme.
I did the plan with some of the leading scholars and economists and tax experts that there are in this country. They love it. They say, why hasn't this been done before? And this is my wheelhouse. That's what I do well. The economy is what I do well.
Donald Trump has announced his tax plan for the U.S. Here's what it entails. The present 7 IRS federal tax rates will be replaced with 4 new rates. Individuals earning less than $25,000 per year would pay no federal income taxes. Mr. Trump says these individuals will send a new form to the IRS that reads, quote unquote, "I win," W-I-N. Individuals earning between $25,001 and $50,000 will pay a 10% federal rate, but 0 federal capital gains taxes. Individuals earning between $50,001 and $150,000 will pay a 20% federal rate and a 15% federal capital gains rate. Individuals earning over $150,001 will pay a 25% federal rate and a 20% federal capital gains rate. Second, corporations will be given a one-time 10% tax rate on earnings they repatriate to the United States. Third, corporate deductions and loopholes will be closed, but corporate taxes will be limited to a flat 15%. Fourth, Mr. Trump would eliminate the alternative minimum tax and close deductions for high earners. Fifth, deductions for mortgage interest and charitable giving will remain for all taxpayers. Is this a sound tax reform plan, or can you trump it?
I think I could trump it, because I think the problem with this plan is that some of the budget estimates have come out in the last couple of days suggest it would take $10 trillion away from the federal budget. And as much as I want to see Medicare and Social Security reform, There is no way that you would ever be able to get that and to afford to have a strong military. I would say some of the positives on this is that you get rid of the deductions, you get rid of the loopholes. The tax code is absurd.
He doesn't get rid of the
he gets some of them. At least mentions it.
He gets one good one. He gets rid of the carried interest. Doesn't nearly make up for the giveaway that he's giving to the top bracket, which would drop 14 points in the rate, and he makes a big deal about abolishing the income tax for the lower income people. They're the 47%. Remember, they don't pay income taxes, so that's a total shell game. This is fraud, and so is Jeb Bush's, by the way. Not quite as big a fraud, but close.
This is supply side economics on amphetamine, and there's going to be a lot of people, and I think Larry Kudlow loves it. And I think there's some good ideas, but I agree with Tom. It's too much of a hole in the treasury right now.
But lower rates and simplify.
Is this the downside of the
plan? A downside indeed. Who are all the Tea Party people who are so worried about the deficit when his plan would raise the deficit another 10 or 11 trillion dollars. Trillion dollars with a T, let us be clear about that. But he does call for one more repeal, and that's the estate tax, which he calls the death tax.
His best idea is not included, and that is tariffs on manufactured goods coming into the country, and use that revenue to cut taxes on small businesses across America.
That's a debate for another week.
Yes, indeed.
Do you remember the Kemp-Roth tax cut?
Sure, 1978, I believe, and what was the other fellow from Wisconsin. Kemp-Roth was in 1980. Was Reagan? Was the Reagan tax
good
cut.
plan?
Well, they credit it with the boom in the 1980s.
If you were rating this plan against that plan, which plan would you rate the higher?
Well, that succeeded. We're going to have to see about this one.
Oh yeah, well we'll live with
this one. Won't get to the starting gate.
We will live with the unknown for a few months. Issue 4, que sera, sera.
We therefore declare that we cannot continue to be bound by these signed agreements with Israel, and Israel must assume fully all its responsibilities as an occupying power.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas sharply rebuked Israel this week. Speaking at the United Nations, President Abbas warned that the Palestinians will no longer abide by major peace agreements such as the Oslo Accords of 1993 and 1995. Foreign policy experts are concerned. The Oslo Accords and other diplomatic arrangements are the foundations of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. If the Palestinians cease cooperation with Israel on issues of governance, trade, and security, the potential for new hostilities will increase markedly. Also, there's Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is reluctant to engage in new peace talks. He fears that doing so may not only reward terrorist groups, but also alienate conservative members of his coalition government. Is this a bluff by the Palestinians, or is Mahmoud Abbas serious? I ask you.
I think it reflects real political difficulty in terms of the Palestinian Authority. I mean, there's fragmentation even away from Hamas to Islamic State-linked groups. There is a belief that the Israelis have not relaxed sanctions enough in terms of quarantining Gaza, for example, and there is a frustration. And I think it's also a play on the fact that Israel's diplomatic stance at the United Nations and around the world is weak at the moment. At the same time, if the Palestinians pursue this track, they will only hurt themselves, and the Israelis will only increase the pressure.
It's an acknowledgement of reality. The peace process is moribund. And I tend to place a bit more blame on Netanyahu, who's walked away from the two-state solution, basically. And the deputy foreign minister in Israel has basically said they're never going to give up the West Bank. They keep building the settlements. They're changing the facts on the ground. So he's walking away from the peace process, but I don't know what he's going to do next. It doesn't really get him anything.
The peace process is dead, I think, John, and the question is what comes next in the Palestinians. Abbas didn't go as far as he could have done, which was basically dissolve his Palestinian Authority, say, look, you're the occupying power, you're responsible for everything to the Israelis. I don't think he wants to do that. But Bibi Netanyahu is never going to take hundreds of thousands of Israelis off the West Bank where they're building new settlements even now.
I think that's right, and Abbas sees this as an opportunity to have some leverage, because if it gets Israel declared an occupying power, and then they're forced to operate under international possibilities of sanctions, etc. But Bibi is only going to bend so far, and I think this is really an act by Abbas to get some leverage.
The two-state solution may very well be dead. And then if you get a one-state solution, it would cease to be a Jewish state because you'd have to give those folks rights, or else it would devolve into an apartheid state.
Well,
they're at a dead end.
Well,
Is it brinksmanship?
I think it's brinksmanship on Abbas's part, and I think it did get Netanyahu's attention. Because look, if the Palestinians say, if Abbas says, I'm retiring, I'm through, we abolish the Palestinian Authority, it's all yours, Israel's got a real problem.
It's a negotiating ploy.
But they'll hurt themselves.
No, again, I think it's an acknowledgement of reality, and I don't think it changes anything on the ground. Maybe the politics on both sides will change in 5 or 10 years, and this can be revived. But President Obama is probably not going to be having a signing ceremony on the South Lawn.
I think Kerry's given up on it. He put an awful lot of time in it and got nowhere.
Right.
I think President Obama's basically given up on it. He's got, what,
John
18
Kerry
months
is
left?
still trying.
Coalition won't allow it.
President Obama's nuclear accord with Iran undermined Israeli-Palestinian relations. You got the question?
Yeah, I don't see a
I don't
direct
see that
relation.
having
Frankly,
an
the
impact.
peace process is dead or dying, as we've said before.
Undermine Israeli-American relations.
I think Clarence is right. I don't think there's any connection there, but Netanyahu really has got that very much on his mind, that Iranian deal. That was the whole emphasis of his UN speech.
It's going to be interesting to see how much that is a part of the 2016 political race. I don't think it's going to be a dominant issue.
Republicans are going to ease back off.
That's what I
We're going to
think.
throw it out the window.
Out of time. Joe Biden will enter the Democratic presidential contest next week. Yes or no?
No, after the debate.
I don't know, but I think no.
No.
I changed my mind, no.
The answer is yes. Bye-bye.